In the early to mid-1970s, when the microcomputer revolution was kicking off, there were an awful lot of systems that were based around the same few family of chips. But because no one was working together, they all had their own basic input-output system, or ROM, an early form of operating system. By 1974, a talented developer called Gary Kildall decided that enough was enough and he wanted to make his own, which was going to be a standard, and he called it the Control Program Monitor System, or CPM. It didn't take long for it to become really popular. It was very, very functional. It had a great API and it worked very well with some input-output stuff. And he managed to set up his own company called Digital Research, which became so popular that by 1980 he had his own private jet. In 1980, IBM were looking for a new operating system for their new line of computers that were based on the 8086 chip. And at the time, they were working with Microsoft Bill Gates. Microsoft at that time didn't have an operating system. So Bill Gates said, go talk to DRI. They've got CPM and they're porting it to the 8086 apparently. And IBM did just that. They approached Gary and they said, let's have a chat. Gary decided that that day was better spent with him hand-delivering boxes of CPM in his private jet, as you do, and sent his wife off to go talk to IBM. And apparently, and this is a scare story that mummy programmers tell their baby programmers at night to tuck them in, his wife refused to sign the NDA. They then never came to an agreement, despite Gary flying back and trying to rescue the day, and Digital Research lost the contract. IBM went back to Bill Gates and said, that was a bust, what do we do? And Bill Gates said, well, there's a small company called Seattle Computer Products who have their own development board based on the 8086. To sell it, they managed to create a small operating system, which they called Quick and Dirty Operating System, or QDOS. Seattle Computer Products had turned it into a proper operating system for selling their products called 86DOS, which was nascent, we'll put it that way, a bit rough and ready. Bill Gates took that, and he took the well-known API, which by this point CPM had, and rolled them together into a new Microsoft product called Microsoft Disk Operating System, or MS-DOS. They called it version 1.0, and then went back to IBM in 1981 and said, there you go, there's the new operating system for your new computers, just in time for IBM to say, that looks brilliant. Now, it did take a couple of years for the IBM PC to gain some traction. It was quite expensive and it was new, and people were still working on lots of other systems, legacy systems. By this point, CPM had quite a long history, but it did have quite a large back catalogue of software, including games. Scott Adams of the very highly regarded Adventure International produced some very good games for CPM. So did Infocom, who later became more famous for their Zork series. But there was lots of productivity software because CPM was a business system as well. WordStar had become the de facto standard, as had DBase for the database market. Now, it wasn't just these heavy-hitting pieces of software, which, to be fair, had also made quite a lot of smashes in other markets as well, that did really well on the CPM platform. Because of its portability, there was an awful lot of groundswell of shareware being written by enthusiasts, including games. For example, Gigatrek was quite a popular little game. Although it was text-based and required a lot of imagination, you could be Captain Kirk flying around the galaxy, killing Klingons. And also a game in 1982 came out called Ladder, which anyone who's played any Mario games or Donkey Kong will recognise. You start off at the bottom, you have to work your way up ladders and avoiding baddies to collect the prize up at the top of the screen. But it has to be remembered that this was in 1982. Digital Research had started work on their 8286 implementation of CPM in 1981, and the 16-bit systems were starting to gain a little bit more traction, and it wasn't long before CPM got graphics. The Amstrad PCW line of computers, for example, had a nice graphics adapter. It was only green screen, but it let you play some better games. Here's Batman. That's one of my favourite games from the PCW. Now, against the backdrop of this new whippersnapper upstart Microsoft Disk Operating System, or MS-DOS, starting to come to the front, and the big old friendly system CPM, which was really well regarded and quite well supported, starting to take more of a backseat, a young chap called Alan Farmer was starting to reach a point in his life where he needed to make a decision. He wanted to go to university, and he really wanted a PC. But they were expensive, so he decided that the best way to learn about this new PC was to write a game for it. So he took a game that he really liked called Ladder from 1982, and because CPM and MS-DOS shared very similar APIs, because Microsoft basically copied the APIs over as best they could from CPM, and the text-based system was very similar between the two, he decided that it was much easier to take a text-based game like that, and so he did. He made Willy the Worm in 1985. Now, there wasn't much of a publishing system for indie developers and young school kids at the time, so the best way to get your software out there was to put it on a bulletin board. A bulletin board was just a software repository or information repository that you could dial up to, and they had a little quota system. For every kilobyte you uploaded, you could download a certain number of other kilobytes, which meant that people were more likely to share. So he uploaded Willy the Worm. It had a little screen inside it that said, if you like it, please send me $10. And after a while, the checks started to flood in, and he made about $3,000, which was enough to get him that PC and get him off to university, which was a nice little success story. Willy the Worm itself ended up going onto a lot of cover discs, and it went into some compilation discs, eventually making it onto some of the big well-known compilation shareware CDs. A couple of years later, Farmer wrote Willy the Worm 2, which by that point commercial software was starting to become a little bit more popular, so Willy the Worm 2 wasn't quite as well known as Willy the Worm 1. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the shareware scene of the 1980s, then I can heartily recommend this book, Shareware Heroes by Richard Moss. It goes into all of the freeware software, public domain, shareware, freeware, all that kind of stuff, including covering things like Apogee Software, Duke Nukem, and the rise of games like Doom. But it also covers Willy the Worm. Okay, so let's have a look at Alan Farmer's Willy. No sniggering. It's a tiny game by modern standards, only about 20 kilobytes with about 10k of data, and it'll fit a couple of times on a floppy disk even of the time. A lot of IBM computers came with black and white monitors, so it asks if you've got a colour one. There were a few colour monitors around by 1985. And IBM computers that shipped with a sound beeper, it was piercingly loud and often didn't come with a volume control. So if you were playing it in an enclosed environment like your office, if you were playing it over your lunch or something, you didn't want to drown out the office with these horrible screechy beeps. So most of the games allowed you to turn the sounds on and off. Of course, it's pre-WASD before the revolution, so it's all arrow keys and the spacebar to jump. So let's have a look. Anyone that's played Donkey Kong or a Mario game, this should be immediately familiar. One of the things that you can't do is stop, though. So if you want to idle, you've got to tap backwards and forwards. There are safe zones that you can get into, and you've got to get to the bell at the top with a time bonus. Oh, not too good. I'm not looking ahead. I made the bet that they'd all go right. One of them didn't. Okay, I'm safe. I'm safe as long as I stay here. That's it. Okay. Yes. All right, this is usually where I get to. This is where it starts to go a bit horribly wrong. Now I've got to get over to that stair step on the other side, which is, I want to say, impossible. And there you have it, how to play Willy the Worm. But the main thing about it was that the levels that came with it weren't the be-all and end-all. Unlike a lot of games at the time, which were pretty much pre-crystallized, this one had a trick. It came with a second program called EdWilly, which allowed you to make your own levels. A fully inbuilt level editor. You could completely customize the entire game to however you wanted it. The editor was extremely simple to use. It had inbuilt help in the form of commands. So, for example, I'm going to try and make this thing on the left here, this platform on the left, a little bit more challenging. So I'm going to use the E key to make a disappearing platform. I'm going to use the D key to make a proper platform, and we'll probably use the Y and V keys to make some steps. Okay, so we'll make a D key, we'll make this, we'll make some steps. And I think we might need a bar on the right hand side to stop us falling off, so I'll use the N key and the C key. And hey presto, now that's a bit low, so I think what I'll do is I'll make this a little easier to get over. Right, now once you've made your level, you've made your changes to your level, you can play it inside the editor. Right, so what I've done is I've basically made myself a trap. So let's see if I can get myself out of that trap. Nope. I've made an impossible situation, in fact. No matter. I will make this. Let's see. Y, V. Nope. C, V, D, D. And we'll put that there so that the balls fall through. Right, let's give that a try. Wait for them to come through. That was evil. Trapped. So there we go. I've managed to make myself a pretty challenging little level, even though I've not managed to finish it yet. Now all I have to do is press the L key to save it, and then press the escape key, and it has copied over the wily.dat file. So if I wanted to send this to one of my friends as a brand new game, I would just copy the DAT file into a separate copy. And if I go into that, this is all I have to send. The CHR are the custom characters, the COM is the program itself, the DAT file contains all the levels, and the SCR is the scoreboard. So now if I was to package all this up, it would only take about 30 kilobytes, which would easily fit on a floppy of the time, like 4 or 5 times. So now I can play it. And if I sent this to my friend, as you can see, it's now a complete version of the game with my level. And I could send this and extremely annoy some of my friends with this impossible to complete version of the game. But myself and a friend who had IBM PCs, there you go, I made it. Hooray! It's not impossible. Hard though. So a friend of mine, we used to send these to each other. We went to school together, so I'd pop it onto a floppy and I'd give him the floppy, and then he would go away and play it, and he would send me some challenge files back too, which kept the game really fresh for a long time. Considering it was free, I probably got more play out of it bang for buck than most of the other games I've ever played. It's a great little game. It's super fun, but you do have to, if you want to go check it out, there's lots and lots of copies of it all over the internet. Do remember to set your DOSBox cycles quite low. I know it feels a bit weird to have it going, but that's how it's supposed to be. But if you wanted to make your own levels for it, which you absolutely can, most of the versions online don't have the ed.wily. They don't have the editor that comes with them. Whoever took the original backup of the game and then everyone's copied off that, left the editor out. So you have to go looking around. And I found it in one place with the editor inside it. But yeah, if you go hunting around, you'll find it eventually. Just look for the edwily.com as part of the package. As I've been putting this video together, I've been looking at all the notes people have put together about it and other words that have been written, and it got me into quite a pensive mood, given the amount of time I spent in it, how little aware I was of the actual context within which it sat. Of course, I had no idea at the time of the long history behind it and of the operating systems from which it came. But knowing all of that now, it's easy to see that Microsoft wouldn't be the billion-dollar industry it is today if they hadn't made that decision many, many years ago to copy those API calls over from CPM. Doing so meant that a lot of developers who were fairly beholden to the original system found the porting over to MS-DOS much easier, and so it gave a groundswell of shareware and public domain from indie developers that then formulated the background of the software that most people had access to when they couldn't afford the real software from big-name companies. It's interesting to play a game of what if. What if there was no shareware? What if there was no cheap software available for the IBM in the early to mid-1980s? Would it have had such the takeoff that it had if the software was so crushingly expensive as the big-name software was? Would it eventually have moved itself into the home? Would people like Amstrad and Tandy and Compaq and all of the others have got into the ecosystem if there hadn't been so many people really interested in it because of all that software that was available? Makes you think, though.